John Locke and Jean Jacques Rousseau. John Locke? Jean Jacques Rousseau? Hitler? What's the connection between... What about the connection between Locke, Churchill, and Roosevelt?
What is this place? Where am I?
Hi, it's Rory, and you're watching Pardon My Youth, News Talk with Rory Who. And today, we're diving deep into Enlightenment philosopher history and connections that may surprise you.
Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. The general will shall guide all.
John Locke and Jean Jacques Rousseau were two Enlightenment philosophers who pioneered theories about individual rights, human nature, and social justice, laying the groundwork for the way governments operate today. So why is Rousseau compared to Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler, while Locke is associated with the likes of Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill? It all comes down to Bertrand Russell, a 20th century British philosopher and logician who lived through World War II. Russell famously claimed that Hitler is an outcome of Rousseau, Roosevelt and Churchill of Locke. Russell was determined to pit Locke and Rousseau against one another. In fact, he even said that
ever since Rousseau's time, those who considered themselves reformers have been divided into two groups, those who followed him and those who followed Locke. Gradually, the incompatibility has become increasingly evident.
Yikes! Russell condemned Rousseau as a proto-fascist and commended Locke as the father of liberalism. Although their differences may have seemed clear-cut to Russell, a more nuanced understanding of Locke's and Rousseau's philosophy reveals significant overlaps at the core of their work, causing Russell's claims to fall short. How are Rousseau and Hitler supposedly linked, and why might Russell's assertions hold no water?
Oops!
Despite post-war circumstances that may have influenced Russell's perception of Rousseau, an examination of Immanuel Kant and Maximilien Robespierre calls his claims into question. Confused by all these names? We've got Russell, Rousseau, Robespierre. Whew. But don't worry. By the end of this video, you'll be adept at naming these philosophers and historical figures alike. So let's get started. Locke and Rousseau were both famous for their idea of the social contract. But what was the social contract exactly? Essentially, it's a deal between a government and its citizens, wherein the citizens agree to give up some of their freedoms in order to receive protections from the government.
You don't kill me, I won't kill you. Hey, sounds great.
Although their social contracts ultimately took different directions, Locke and Rousseau began their work with the same goal in mind: to create a government that could best serve the needs of the citizens.
I'd like free healthcare, please. One ballistic missile coming right up.
Both Locke and Rousseau initially put forth a state of nature, essentially describing the conditions of human beings before any social or political order, which they then used to justify their social contract. Unlike Thomas Hobbes, the third of the famous three social contract philosophers, who believed that the state of nature was violent and savage, Locke and Rousseau thought it to be much more peaceful. Locke emphasized that even in the state of nature, humans had the fundamental right to life, liberty, and property. Rousseau went so far as to vehemently criticize Hobbes, introducing compassion as part of the state of nature instead. Like Locke, Rousseau played an important role in promoting human rights, advancing both the concept of such rights and laying the framework for the work of humanitarian organizations that uphold such rights today. Locke and Rousseau's belief in the innate goodness of humanity motivated how they constructed their social contracts. Both stressed the individual's right to freedom. However, they took slightly different approaches. For Locke, freedom preserved the natural rights and free will of the individual, whereas for Rousseau, freedom constituted liberty from desires or external influences via accepting the laws of the general will. What is this general will exactly? Essentially, it's the collective will of the citizens, a true direct democracy. But here's where it gets trippy. It's not necessarily the majority will of the citizens, not if there are certain external influences potentially manipulating this majority will or preventing the citizens from thinking clearly or rationally, which could influence their opinion.
We look alike, but we're not the same person. Can you spot the difference?
Instead, the general will is the true collective will of the citizens when they have liberty and freedom, able to think for themselves and come up with a consensus that is best for everyone and allows the government to, once again, best serve the needs of the individual.
I'd like free healthcare, please.
Me too.
Is it the general will? One health subsidy program coming right up.
Although Locke and Rousseau's definitions of freedom differed, both emphasized consent in their doctrines. An individual must consent to be governed, and they explicitly have to be the ones to accept the social contract. If the government forces them on them, in and of itself, that's a violation of the social contract.
You can't eat the pizza with hands. Do I have your consent? No. What about washing your hands before eating? Okay.
Coercing, indoctrinating, or otherwise manufacturing consent would violate the social contract. Locke's and Rousseau's proposals to limit government power, especially in Rousseau's case, as the sovereignty of his social contract was not the government, but the general will, did not escape the notice of monarchies in the Enlightenment. They felt threatened and exiled Locke and Rousseau, in part for their radical views.
Social contract? Screw the radicals. Unfriend them.
But little did they know, Locke and Rousseau's ideas would later flourish under new governmental systems. Now that we've seen why Locke and Rousseau are similar, what about the connection between Locke, Churchill, and Roosevelt? Locke, often regarded as the father of liberalism, proposed that the function of civil government is to protect citizens' natural rights and punish those who violate the rights as others, acting as
an impartial judge to determine the severity of the crime.
If Franklin D. Roosevelt was liberal, what sets Locke and Roosevelt apart? For that, we look to Isaiah Berlin, a philosopher who theorized that there was both positive and negative liberty. Positive liberty was the internal freedom to do something, your own desires and courage that free you and allow you to take the actions that you want. Whereas negative liberty is freedom from external factors that might seek to oppress you or prevent you from taking the actions that you want to do. Locke's definition of freedom, emphasizing the preservation of natural rights, aligns with Isaiah Berlin's concept of negative liberty. After all, Locke wanted a model where everyone was free from any external influences that might affect their own natural rights. The intent of Locke's government was to give citizens freedom from these interferences. This idea characterized Locke's work and cemented him as one of the great figures of modern liberalism today. Churchill and Roosevelt's governments were certainly influenced by Locke's philosophy, but to call them outcomes of Locke? That would be a stretch. Roosevelt was a liberal, but he leaned more towards positive rather than negative liberty in his policies. During World War I, his Four Freedoms speech outlined 4 key freedoms he believed governments had an obligation to protect: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. These freedoms paralleled Locke's natural rights, but Roosevelt sought to attain these freedoms for citizens through government interference. Roosevelt's policies, such as his New Deal, included economic relief initiatives and more government regulation, marking a shift towards Berlin's positive liberty and away from the traditional American philosophy of negative liberty. Rather than freeing his citizens from external influences, Roosevelt actively used government interference to instead empower his citizens' internal positive freedoms instead. Locke may have been the father of liberalism, but he was certainly no father of Roosevelt and Churchill. Now we know why Locke and Rousseau are so similar, and why Roosevelt and Churchill were not outcomes of Locke. But what about the connection, or lack thereof, between Hitler and Rousseau? Find out in the next and last video of this series below. Be sure to check out part 2 for the real verdict on whether Jean Jacques Rousseau was really a proto-fascist or not. Thanks for watching.